All right, well, it looks like we're getting near the number of registered attendees, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ross Branch. I'm the Public Affairs Manager for Placer County Water Agency. I want to thank you again for joining us for this webinar on the state of PCWA's water supply. We've got some great information for you today to share with you today, and we're really excited for this opportunity. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to discuss. Number one is that this webinar is being recorded. So if you know individuals who are not able to attend or you would like to watch again at a later date, the webinar will be posted to our website at pcwa.net. So you'll be able to go back and watch again if you wish. For those attendees who prefer to read along during the presentations, there is a live transcript option for this webinar. To activate that option, just move your cursor to the bottom of the screen and a live transcript icon should appear. And if you click on that, a closed caption feature should appear at the bottom of the screen also, so you can kind of read along. Lastly, this is a live webinar, so there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of both presentations today. If you would like to ask a question, similar to where that icon is for live transcript, just find the Q&A button at the bottom of the page. You can submit your question there. Those will be sent on to the moderator to ask on your behalf. So if you could just please provide your name and your town or your city so we can properly recognize you if we get to your question. Now, with that said, we do have nearly over 100 participants today. And so I can't promise we can get to every question. But if we don't, and you have a question that you do want to ask, we encourage you to send that question to info@pcwa.net, and we will respond as soon as is practical. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator and presenters for today. First, our moderator today is a man who needs little introduction in this area. He is Barry D. Stigers, and he's the news director and morning news host for KAHI Radio right here in Auburn. Barry has been in radio broadcasting for over 60 years, starting in a small town local radio, moving his way into television and then into cable television. He came to Auburn, California, and went to KAHI AM Radio 950 in early 2000, retired for 4 years, but then came back in 2016 to become the daily news host and serve as the news director on 3 stations for KAHI, both AM, FM, and streaming. KAHI is focused on local, state, and county city issues for many years and continues to this day as one of the only true locally focused broadcast outlets in the country. So I certainly recommend adding it to your dial. Thank you, Barry, for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me as a part of your program. It's an important discussion to have right at this point, for sure.
Yeah. So our first presenter today is Shane Motley. Shane is the acting director of PCWA's Energy Marketing Group and has more than 20 years experience as a trained meteorologist. So thank you, Shane, for joining us today also.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And our second presenter is Linda Higgins. Linda is the Deputy Director of Customer Services at PCWA, and she is the agency's principal water efficiency expert. Linda has nearly 20 years of experience working in water efficiency roles throughout the region. So thank you, Linda, for being here also today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So with that complete, we will go ahead and start the program. So Barry, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and Shane.
Thanks very much. And thanks for all of you joining us in today. Water in California, since basically we even became a state, has always been a commodity. There's always a bunch of people wanting to control that water because of their needs, include farming and et cetera. So with the droughts and all the things that we have to deal with now, and after the tremendous amount of problems with fires that we have had, this is a very timely conversation today. And what I want to do is just start off with a very simple question. Shane, can you explain for us how PCWA actually does the snow surveys? And I ask you that because the snowpack here in California is Mother Nature's reservoir of all the water, but it takes a process of time and sunshine and other things to happen to get that water down into the rivers and then on into where we can hold the water, distribute it then through your systems to the consumer. So since the snowpack is so important to the process, maybe the most important, how do you deal with that as a water company?
Yeah, there is a lot of planning that goes around how much water we get throughout the wet season, which typically runs from about October through May. And earlier this year, when we were planning on how things were looking like, setting up atmospherically with the weather patterns, it was looking like we were going to start off kind of on a wet note and then end on a drier note. And that certainly happened, but what we didn't expect was the extremes that we saw. So we had record-breaking precipitation in October, and then that jet stream, the conveyor belt for our storms, moved a little bit further to the north. So that storm track took some very strong storms into Washington and Oregon, caused some catastrophic flooding up there. And then in December, it shifted back down and brought us some historic snowfalls for December, where some locations received upwards of 200 inches of snow during the month of December alone. And then since then, it shifted from that very wet pattern to the very dry pattern, with the driest January, February, and March on record. So that has certainly made for a very interesting year, but now we have that snowpack on the hill. And the key now that we're trying to figure out is how much of that snowpack is eventually going to make it into our reservoirs. And that brings up the question that you asked, Barry, about the snow surveys. And that's an integral part in our planning as we go through the warmer months and that snowpack starts to melt and makes it into our reservoirs. So the way we do that is we actually have to send folks out on the ground to make these measurements. We do this about once a month, 4 times a year across our 4 snow courses here at PCWA. And what they do is they head out to the field, and they, you may have seen this in some of the news reports, but they take a pole and they shove that pole into the ground. And of course, we're all interested in the depth of the snowpack, but what the reason that we're doing these core samples is for is we take that snow and then weigh it. And what that tells us, with a little bit of math, is how much water is contained within the snowpack. So you see them making the measurements there. And some snowpacks, we might have a snowpack that's 40 inches deep, but there may only be about 4 inches of liquid water contained within that depth. And that's eventually what we're expecting will move down the mountain and make it into our reservoirs.
I've noticed and I've read that you take several samples at each point. It's not just a poke it in the ground and then leave after you measure it. So how long does this take? Is it a day, an hour? How long does it take you to do these samples?
Yeah, when we watch those videos, it looks like it's a pretty simple process of just sticking a pole in the ground and measuring, but it actually can be very difficult at times. Sometimes you can hit through ice layers, and that would be a layer of ice that formed from maybe a previous snowstorm that melted. And you want to take lots of samples because the wind after a snowstorm occurs can actually blow snow into drifts. And you don't want one single measurement to dictate your final measurement for a given snow course. So we might take upwards of 10 measurements at a given snow course, make all those assessments of how much water is in each core sample, and then average that out. And that gives you your final value for that particular course. And of course, we also will do some different samples at some maybe higher elevation courses to give us some information on how much snowpack is available at these higher elevations, which is typically a little bit deeper than the lower elevations. You may remember back in late March of this year, we had another record that was with respect to temperature. So we had those record high temperatures, and that melted a lot of the snowpack at the lower elevation. So yes, there's a lot of effort that goes into this. It's not something that's a quick one and done, and then you're done for the day. It can take quite a while.
I sort of read this year, and it seemed to be a surprise to me, but earlier in the year, it appeared as though we were on schedule, that we were right up there and we were going to do fine. And with the discussions of drought and continuation of drought, et cetera. But when you got to the April one, that seemed to be the peak. And I kept hearing that word, that it was the peak. So what is so important about the April reading?
Yeah, that's a very good point. The April 1st reading is very important simply because by that time, you've acquired pretty much the maximum amount of snowpack you're going to get in a year. And the theory is that as these snowstorms occur, you're just going to pile the snow on top of each other. And by April 1st, that's about the time that most of the snowfall for a given year has come to an end. And at that point, you're going to start melting that snowpack, and that's going to make it into the reservoir. So once we make that measurement in April, it gives us a pretty good indication on how much water we can expect to run down the hill and into our reservoirs during that melting season.
But you still have these factors, how much snow there is, which means how deep it is, and then how much water is inside. And I thought I understood that when you measure that water, that would be the amount of water, if you melt it right now, that would turn into real liquid. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. So a lot of things can happen with the snowpack. If you've ever seen an ice tray in your freezer, you might put the ice in the freezer and then 5 months later come back and a little bit of that ice is gone, and you might wonder, well, what happened? Some of that ice can actually evaporate. It's called sublimation. The same thing can happen with the snowpack. It may not soak into the ground, but it can actually evaporate. And so why we're making these measurements throughout the year is to see what that snowpack is doing. And the assessment that we're doing in April is suggesting that, we have about, say, 4 inches of water within that snowpack. Not necessarily all of that will come down the hill, but we're assuming, based on some calculations that we can do, we can get a pretty rough estimate on how much of that water will make it into the rivers and eventually into the reservoirs. But that brings up a very good point, is this year, the results are suggesting that we're definitely behind normal. So we do have a slide showing how much percentage with respect to normal we have this year as opposed to normal. And right now we're going to cue that up here, and you can see PCWA's snow courses are running at 32% of normal for that April 1st reading. Statewide, we're at 38% of normal, and you can see some of the other breakdowns there. Given that we are dealing with this below normal trend, we are still doing okay with what we're expecting for this summer with our water management, from anything from recreation to our raw and treated water supplies, the environmental regulations that we have to abide by. We're going to be fine. And one of the reasons for that, even though we have a very low snowpack right now, is actually in part due to the October snowstorm. So you might remember last year, we had more snow on the ground, but a lot of that snow got soaked into the record dry soils that we had at that point. This year, because of the October storm, it saturated the soils. Then we had the December snowpack on top of that. So we're expecting that a lot more of this snowpack, even though it's not much, is going to make it into our reservoirs. And that puts us in a better position than where we were last year at this time.
You scientists have a way of giving all of us interesting words. One of El Nino, it took me a long time to get that one figured out because it didn't give me enough information, excuse me, and so I wasn't sure what you meant. But now I see a new one you have this year, winter whiplash. Tell me about that.
Yeah, and I really do like that phrase. That phrase was coined just a couple of years ago by some researchers. And what it's trying to get at is, here in California, for those folks that have lived out here for a while, we're used to extremes on one end or the other with respect to our precipitation. So here in California, we have more variability in our year-to-year precipitation than anywhere else in the country. For example, in a given year, the normal precipitation, and by normal, I mean the average precipitation in the Sierra over the course of all the 100-year record, is around 50 inches. But you can see extremes from one year to the next of maybe 30 inches one year and upwards of 70 to 80 inches the next year. Another location, say Houston, Texas, for example, they also receive about 50 inches of rain, but their variability from one year to the next is roughly plus or minus 5 inches. Whereas here it can be plus or minus 20 to 30 inches. So we see a lot of variability from one year to the next, and that's that idea of whiplash. The interesting thing though about this year is we were seeing this kind of a sub-annual whiplash where we had that record-breaking precipitation in October, then dry November, record-breaking precipitation in December, and then a very dry January, February, and March. So that has made things very interesting across the state. And there are some indications that that trend is going to continue or potentially get even more extreme in the coming years.
Now, part of this discussion was also, you call it an atmospheric river. Help me with that one. Is a jet stream involved? How does that all work?
Yeah, another term, right? There's lots of them out there. You might have heard this in the past, back in the 90s, we were calling this the Pineapple Express. It's the same thing, but it's a river of moisture that gets scooped up from the subtropics. And as the storms come across the Pacific, they bring that moisture into the state. And this is the main driver of our precipitation throughout a given year. So the more atmospheric rivers we have that eventually go across the Pacific, run into our mountain ranges, that air gets lifted up and the precipitation is more or less squeezed out. That determines whether or not we have a wet or a dry year. Now, normally we see about 8 of these a year, 8 strong to extreme atmospheric rivers, and they are ranked in terms of their duration over a given area and the amount of moisture they have. In the past couple of years, we've only seen upwards of 3 or 4. And that's a little bit unusual that we're seeing this consistently one year after the next. They're just missing us. So here's another animation showing some of these atmospheric rivers moving across, and you can see it scooping up moisture all the way from Hawaii. So it's interesting when you look at this because our weather, even though we're here in California, it's determined by events that are happening all the way down in the subtropics. And if we get a lot of these atmospheric rivers, it can actually tip the scales the other direction and lead to floods. So that's why California is so unique across the United States in terms of its precipitation because of these atmospheric rivers.
I've lived in California about some 35 years. And when I first came here, it was raining for about a month straight. We had some floods. And so I didn't know if I'd moved to the right part of the world. But then over these years, I hear the word drought a whole lot more. Mm-hmm. So we are what it appears to be into another drought, and that takes us into another whole world. So as you deal with this, you deal a lot with averages. So how does this drought look to us? And I will switch over to Linda in a minute. She has some thoughts about what the government, the state government, is going to do about all that. So are we in a drought? Are we looking forward to another dry summer? Do you have that foresight yet?
Yes, I mean, we have an agency that actually determines the drought and the drought severity, and we are technically in a drought right now in California. And here at the agency, we're always preparing for the worst and hoping for the best with respect to our precipitation, but we are in one of the worst dry deficits that we've ever seen here in California. So if you combine the last 3 years, so that would be water year 2020, water year 2021, and then this current year, we are in the driest 3-year period that we have ever been in. Now, we're in such an amazing drought deficit right now that it is actually an entire year's worth of precipitation that we have built up in that deficit over the past 3 years. So that puts us in a pretty tough spot across the state. And I think that is what Linda is going to talk about in just a few moments.
Okay, one final question for you. It appears to me this year that the dropping of the water, like at Folsom Dam, is not as severe as it has been in years past. What's changed, if anything?
One of the great benefits that we had this year was simply the precipitation that we had at the beginning of the year. That was really a windfall for us. That storm system came right up the I-80 corridor, dumped a lot of water in a short amount of time. And like I said, most importantly, that helped saturate those soils so that subsequent storms actually led to inflows into our rivers, streams, and reservoirs. So without that storm, we would have been in a much tighter spot. But of course, that goes back to these atmospheric rivers. It's kind of like a boom or bust cycle. And fortunately, that storm put us in quite a boom And then unfortunately, we slowed things down quite a bit as we went through the remainder of the winter.
You mentioned this earlier, and that was the fact that we had the major fires, and we also had very like a scorched earth. And so when the water came down, it just sunk into the ground because it was so dry. Now, that's not happening this year, but the fires did in fact change all that, right?
Yeah, the fires actually can do something rather unique to the soils. It's called a hydrophobic soil, where in the fire areas, you can actually prevent the moisture from soaking into the soils and it just runs down. That's, of course, the reason why we get concerned in years like this, where we're coming off the heels of what was a very bad fire season last year. And as you hit into the wet season, it can cause those mudslides. Those have occurred, but fortunately, I guess in one aspect of the dry conditions is that we did not have the extreme events with some of the mudslides that we could have had given the fire situation. But again, it looks like we're heading into another very warm summer. Conditions are most likely going to be above normal once again with respect to the temperatures. And if you look at Placer County as a whole, the past 2 years not only have been very dry, but in the summer, they've been the hottest on record. So we see 2020 was the hottest summer on record if we look at the period from July through September. And then that was beat out in 2021 by yet again another record. And this year we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed that we're not hitting those extremes, but it is certainly looking like another hot summer, and that's very typical. You mentioned the El Nino. Right now we're in a La Nina. That's fairly typical in these La Nina regimes where we're a little bit more prone to hitting those extreme heat events during the summer months.
Let's turn the camera and the microphone now over to Linda Higgins. She's the Deputy Director, as you heard, of Customer Service for PCWA. Linda, how are you? Oh, there you are.
I am doing great.
Great, thank you. Thanks for being a part of this thing. Marketing and the scientific part of your company are two somewhat different, aren't they? I mean, you deal with a whole different world. One of the things that I think all of us expect is that when we reach over and turn on the spigot, that the water is going to come out there. And if not, it's panic time, right? So with all of that and with all the talk of drought and everything else, how are we doing? Are we going to get through this? Do you have enough supply to keep my tapping?
Yes. It sounds like based on Shane's delivery, it sounds like we do have sufficient supply to meet our customer demands. But as the slide says there, but there is, you know, as he mentioned, he said we have the three of the driest years on record. So the governor has come out with an executive order just as of late last month, calling on all Californians to help out. And so PCWA, we've made long-term investments, during dry times, but our watershed is part of the larger integrated statewide water system. And many of those parts of that system are under stress, as you can see here. So the more we save in our local watershed, that helps provide more water to Folsom and ultimately to the American River. So essentially, in terms of conservation and efficiency, we're all in this together.
Now, the governor, who has come out with or as you mentioned, he's come out now with, I think he's a little mad at us because he asked for a 25% reduction and they're getting like 1%. So our governor tends to get a little feisty with us when we don't do what he really asks us to do. And I got the impression that with his order now, that he's going to expect you, the water companies, to be the police on this process. How does that work?
Well, so let me, I'm gonna back up and maybe explain just a tiny bit of what the executive order said. So he did call on all Californians to strive to limit summertime water use. He also, yes, is directing water providers that have adopted a water shortage contingency plan, kind of like an emergency plan, to implement a stage 2 of that plan and take actions to achieve up to a 20% conservation. He's also, the executive order also directs the State Water Resources Control Board to consider adopting emergency rules prohibiting the watering of non-functional turf for commercial, industrial, and institutional customers. So, and since you asked, I'll go ahead and answer your actual question. So, so it does kind of sound like he's asking us to be kind of the water cops, and I think, you know, PCWA, our goal is to help educate customers. You know, during the last drought in 2015, we were asked to save also, and our customers all pitched in, and we met the goal without the need for any sort of fines. You know, we have an amazing water efficiency team that will go out and help our customers look for ways that they can be more water efficient. If they do have any leaks, they're also very, very adept at helping customers look for those as well. So our goal is to educate our customers with the services that we have, and then customers, you know, we don't have eyes and ears everywhere. Our customers are helping us to be the eyes and the ears. So if there is water waste out there, they can definitely report it on our website, and we are more than happy to go out and again to help educate our customers.
Linda, this is not the first time a governor has asked you folks to do this, right? I mean, I thought I heard somewhere that at one time you actually had the authority to issue a ticket or two.
PCWA has the mechanism to issue we don't not a ticket, because we don't have that. We have basically in our rules and regulations, we do have the ability to leave door tags and leave fines. But again, as I mentioned, in the last drought, we did not issue a fine. We did get lots of water waste, and we did go out there and help educate customers. Our goal is to try to help versus, you know, any punitive measures, and it worked. It worked in the last drought. Our customers did help us meet our goals.
Thanks. That's been a real education, and this is, I guess, kind of the first step of your educational process, which is to get the word out to everybody.
Right.
We're going to take some questions from everybody here now for a moment, and we have 2 or 3 waiting in. Let's see here. Anyone who wants to submit, why don't we go through that process again? What does a customer who's watching us at this moment have to do to get a question into the process here? Who wants to answer that one for me? Oh, okay.
This is Kathy. All they have to do is type it into the Q&A button at the bottom of their screen, and all the panelists will be able to see that question. Okay, great.
We have Shane from Loomis. Given that there are April storms, will PCWA conduct a May snow survey?
Yeah, I think I can address that question, Barry.
Okay.
Yeah, every year we actually do have a May snow survey, and we will absolutely conduct a snow survey in May. And sometimes there are years where that snow survey is very short because there is absolutely no snow on the ground. You can almost just fly over and put a big goose egg in there for no snow. This year we are hoping, and keeping our fingers crossed, these storms that are coming up in the next couple of weeks here will add to the snowpack, but that has yet to be seen. Regardless, though, we will do another snow survey in May to see what the numbers finally hold.
Great. Shane, this is from Lisa. County supervisors are projecting Sierra snowpack to continue to decline the upcoming decades as a result of climate change. So how is PCWA preparing for the projected deficits in the water supply in the future?
Yeah, so that is a very, very good question, and it is something that we are all keeping a close eye on. The snowpack over the past several years, especially at lower elevations, has shown signs that it is not, it is deteriorating over the decades. That is simply because the temperatures are increasing. So you have this snowpack that maybe at an elevation of 5,000 feet used to be, a certain amount on a given day. And now we're seeing that amount is decreasing. Because of that, we are going to have to essentially really concentrate on right now we're in this drought condition, but if we get into a situation where we get a lot of precipitation and that atmospheric river comes in and dumps a lot of rain on snow, you could have a lot of water coming into your system very quickly. And I know that's not on our minds right now because we're in such a deficit with precipitation. But of course, as we go forward in time, that is something that we're going to have to pay very, very close attention to, simply because at the very beginning of the conversation, Barry, you were talking about this reservoir that we have in the snowpack. If that reservoir is not there, as we start getting further and further into the winter, then we're going to have to change our management practices here on how we deal with that.
So the two reservoirs then, and this is another question asking of Chris, when the two reservoirs, will they be actually full as we get into summer this year?
This summer, we're not expecting them to be completely full, but we are expecting them to be higher than they were last year.
Sure.
All right, I don't see any more questions there. Do we have any more, team? Do we have any more questions coming in?
You know what, Barry, while maybe there's some more questions coming in, maybe we kind of prepared a few more slides about what PCWA is asking of our customers to do. So if you don't mind, I can just go through those while we get some more questions coming in.
Sure, I just got one in from John. How much capacity cushion do you have to deliver water during the typical years versus the drought years? Good question. Who wants to take that one?
Capacity cushion. I'm assuming that they're asking, how do we manage around years where we are really, really strapped for water? And that's what we're doing throughout the entire year. As we go into this winter, for example, we're really ratcheting down things so that we can have the ability to meet our needs as we go into the summer months. So we're really getting tested this year over the, like we said, we're in this deficit at the moment where we, which we haven't seen before. But the cushion, that's what we're constantly trying to address is how we can dial things back so that we can conserve the water and the wetter months to use in the drier months.
Jane, this one's probably for you also. Sue from Roseville is asking, what is your definition of non-functional turf?
Linda, I think that might be a good one for Linda. What I believe, Linda, would you like to take that one?
The state board is supposed to actually come up with it, but they defined it. So it's basically an area where well, I guess I'll give an example. So it wouldn't apply to something like a school or a sports field or a park where kids are playing on it, or animals, that sort of thing. So there are areas that are, and for example, like kind of in between where two streets, there's a little tiny strip and a median that has turf. One, it's very difficult to water. And then two, if there's often, overwatering that happens. So I think what they're trying to do is any areas that, where the turf is just not able to be used or be water efficiently. So again, but there's still, that part of the regulation has not been completed yet, but that's kind of my definition of the non-functional turf.
Okay, Linda, I'm going to come back to you in a second here after this next question, because one of the things that came up is the question is so what is PCWA going to do next to help all of us deal with this? So can you get ready for that? I'll be with you in a minute. This is from John at Loomis. My household replaced lawns 8 years ago and replaced with drought tolerant plant. does the 20% reduction apply to my current water usage, which I feel is already reduced? Is there an average water use that applies to the 20% reduction? I think the end of that might be yours.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. And it's something that, we talk about often. And so the answer specifically to John, I would say, is that doesn't apply to you. I think, we're looking for, customers in general, obviously, to save, but there are some that haven't done that yet. So we really appreciate that you've already taken that step. And I hope that you took advantage of our rebate program. And I think we might have a slide about that. But, we are offering customers $1 per square foot to take out up to $1,000 to take out their turf and put in water efficient plants.
Great.
So, and there's more information about all of our rebates. So yes, up to $1,000 to replace your lawn, up to $500 for a high efficiency sprinklers or drip irrigation, also $250 for our smart controllers. And last year we added a pool cover rebate.
The this slide will be available on the website, right? So we can all get it. If we forget and don't see it all today and not even understand it, we can also get into your systems and find out what this really means to me personally, right?
Correct.
Great. Let's see then if we we have one more here. Sharon, where are you pulling your snow data? The April 1 snow results saw from California looked even more dismal than the numbers that we were sharing here today.
Yeah, so there are various snow courses throughout California. There's more than 200 of them that get sampled. And then there's actually some automated sensors out there that do their best estimate on what the snowpack looks like at a given time. So the numbers all get combined, and those do change. There's some that, once the snow survey is made, those are set in stone for the given month. But as you go forward in time, so for example, today, some of the automated sensors might have been adjusted downward, which, since we haven't gotten much in the way of precipitation, I would agree that they probably look more dismal than those numbers that we just provided.
Here's a question from Jerry in Roseville. Given winter whiplash, the vulnerability that's each year present, why are the water releases so large through the winter months? Wouldn't it be more prudent to limit the releases until we get more through the winter before letting the water be released? Before you answer that, maybe you could detail a little bit more about who really makes those decisions to control all that water. I don't think you can do that with your PC, right?
No, and this raises a very important point about the water management throughout California. The first and foremost concern, especially within our area, is flood control. We want to make absolutely certain that, given one of these atmospheric rivers that happen throughout the winter, that we have enough room within the reservoirs to capture that. Now, this year is certainly one of those years where we have plenty of room to capture that. But in some of these other years, we enter an area where it might be getting too close to call. And for that reason, they might do some releases. There's also environmental regulations that we have to abide by to make sure that we have the appropriate water coming downstream at any given time. There's a lot of very vulnerable species within our basin, and we have to make sure that we're preserving them as well as meeting the needs of our customers throughout the year.
Here's a question that came in a minute ago, and that was the difference on the rebate programs and how the difference of your customer base works. For instance, you have agricultural customers, people who grow stuff, who really need water and buy contracts, et cetera. And then there's me, who live on a street with a sprinkler system of 25 little squirters that get the water out where it needs to go. So how do you treat us differently?
If the question is related to if there are rebates for our canal customers, so canal customers can certainly apply. We do actually have a brand new rebate for canal customers. It's our storage tank rebate. And that program is actually a new rebate that we have this year. In terms of services, I think it would depend on the type of program that's being offered and the request. So I would say we could probably, I'm sure one of the slides, we can put up our information and the customer could reach out to us. So we could just see what the need was.
Now, if any question is not answered on this format today, then you can call in and you go in and go through the processes that are available to you. And you can get it answered because the staff has told me point blank that they will answer every single question you all have. So if you didn't get everything you wanted to hear today, then send your question, get it into the staff, and they will get back to you and give you the answer. It's obvious they have the answers. It's been a very interesting process. Here's a question, last one. This is from Brian of Roseville. Do the scientists know what causes the more frequent high pressure system off the California coast, continuously preventing those storms from reaching California and pushing them into Oregon and Washington? Shane, this looks like one of your favorite questions.
Yeah, that is an excellent, excellent question. And that's something that scientists are continuing to try to figure out. We have a rough idea of the types of patterns that would help support an atmospheric pattern that would be more prone to producing that ridge of high pressure offshore and sending the jet stream north of us. One of those, of course, that we've all heard about is the La Nina, and that's the pattern that we're currently in. And it seems odd that La Nina, which is has to do with the sea surface temperatures in the equator. It seems odd that something that far away could influence a ridge of high pressure as far north as California, but that is in fact the case. Now, dialing into that a little bit, there's other things that can help influence the jet stream in addition to La Nina. And when you kind of compile all these together, that's what ultimately determines whether or not we have a wet or a dry year. So the challenge for the scientists is to figure out what is going to be the controlling factor that may not be the main contributor, but may kind of assist. So something that may assist making that ridge a little bit stronger or just strong enough to keep us dry, or something that may assist in making the jet stream a little bit stronger so that it can break through that ridge and bring us some precipitation. There's a lot of ideas out there. There's a lot of research that pours into it every single year. Sometimes we come up short. Sometimes there's something that indicates that we might be onto something. But the long answer, or the short answer to a very long question, is we're still trying to figure that out.
We're getting close to being out of time here today, and I hope we have covered most everything. But let me ask you, Linda, is there anything that you had on your list that we didn't touch on?
Just a couple things that we're asking of our customers in response to the governor's executive order. And so essentially, these are some things that we determined that we think will get us to the savings, and that we think are, we can help our customers that could help us. So we're asking customers to replace old sprinklers with more efficient nozzles, and we have rebates available for that. We're also asking our customers to check the soil before they turn on their sprinklers, and they can pick up one of these moisture meters at our main office or at one of our events. And we're also asking customers, because of during the last drought, everyone stepped up and turned off their water, but we saw a lot of tree mortality. So what we're asking is, if you do cut back on your watering your landscape, be sure to water your trees. And we have lots of information on our website about how to maintain your trees while cutting back on watering your landscape. We're also asking customers to limit landscape watering to 3 days per week. And my favorite one is we are asking customers to put down some mulch. What we like to say around here is that mulch is like icing on a cake. So it's the finishing touch, it retains the moisture and keeps your plant roots cool. And I think we have, maybe the slide, but we have an event at Del Oro High School where we're going to be giving away free mulch, 1 yard of free mulch to customers that come by and see us.
Great. Thank you both. Boy, it's been a great session. I've learned more, and every time I get near you folks, I learn more and more. So I hope the audience did get a chance to see the depth of knowledge you all have. That one about the trees, I lost one of 3 trees last year because of my own mistake. So you made me feel bad yesterday, but I got over it real quick because now I know what to do. We did save the tree, but
Good.
that's a very good point, because when you shut the water off, the tree doesn't get any water. That's a problem. So that's about it, I guess, for us. Ross, thanks for giving us this opportunity, this forum, because it gets an opportunity to get an awful lot of information out to people that are panicking technically. A lot of people I talk to all the time are constantly telling me, what are we going to do about these droughts? And then who do I yell at? So maybe it's you, Ross. We yell at you. Is that okay?
Please, no. Well, I want to thank you, Barry. I know it's you're very busy, and I want to thank Shane and Linda, of course, for participating. And I also want to thank, of course, everyone who stuck around for questions and who joined us today. Really insightful information. As I said at the beginning, if you have a question that we weren't able to get to, you can email it to us at info@pcwa.net. And we will respond to those. Also, I would recommend following us on social media. We do have a Twitter and a Facebook account, and YouTube, where this video will eventually reside. And we post stuff daily, stuff about rebates, just stuff about the agency's doing related to new projects. And so I would certainly encourage you, if you haven't already started following us, to please follow us. And once again, thanks everybody for coming. I thought it was a great informational session, and if we certainly look forward to doing more of these in the future. And so enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Thank you.